So this is a time of day where there is a sunset and it promises a sunrise tomorrow. And what's the most beautiful thing is that there are 2 days, today and that day when you meet your Creator. And we live between those 2 days. Now watch this. And now what's happening is that we talk about a country, we talk about, living with fault lines. These fault lines between different races have been present from the time of 1957 since independence. And you can see here how fractured this road is. No one has bothered to repair it. And you got foreigners who come in here every day. Hundreds and hundreds of people walk through. This is an example of what is happening in a country that is fractured, where fault lines appear. And we pretend and we walk over it and we don't bother to heal it. And this is why we are so fractured in our character and culture of diversity. Welcome everyone to HEARTtalk, coming to you live from Kota Kinabalu in Sabah in Malaysia. If this is the first time that you're joining us on HEARTtalk, I want to welcome you. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, I would encourage you to please press that bell, because I want to hear those bells ringing, and I know, so they jingle loud, and I have you as my company, and I would love you to be part of us. As the subscribers grow larger and, more people join in, it gives us a lot of impetus and helps us think more of what's pleasing and what's interesting at the moment in time. Now, today is a very special day because we are doing a series called Quo Vadis Malaysia, which means a Latin phrase for where are you going, Malaysia? As parents, very often we tell our children, we ask that same question, not to be inquisitive, but we want to know that they are going to a safe place and they are coming home safely. And this is important for a nation like Malaysia. And so I started this series called Quo Vadis Malaysia, interviewing some personalities which have played an important part past, seeing the direction of the country, and some new people with some fantastic ideas who are focused on taking Malaysia to a better place. And today is no exception. But I want to start off with an opening statement, so bear with me. We are a fractured nation. And when I say fracture, I mean as a medical man, as a surgeon myself. There are different types of fractures, and fractures can actually cause an injury to the bone. It gets fractured. There can be just cracks or breaks in the bone. And sometimes if they are broken in 2 or 3 places, we call it a comminuted fracture. But these comminuted fractures can sometimes take time to heal. But there are also other types of fractures which are called compound fractures. And what happens is when those pieces break through the surface of the skin, and we can literally see blood and bone. Now, in the very same context of fractures, and I talk about fault lines. When you talk about the life of a nation, there are fault lines. And these fault lines are very much similar to the geological fault lines, when there are tectonic shifts, and they can result in earthquakes that result in earthquakes of causing, damage and tragedy through tsunamis, through flooding. And these fault lines are very much caused by different races in different regions in this part of the world. Now, what has happened is that when these fault lines of different races, when they cause a breakthrough through the skin, they're surfaced, they can result in tragedy. And in Malaysia, we have been part and parcel of that tragedy, which we all know and remember, on May 13, 1969. And so when that happened in the very heart of the city, in the capital of this country, Kuala Lumpur, the needs and the intelligence of a doctor was summoned. And that doctor was Tun Dr Ismail Abdul Rahman. A member of government, and became the deputy prime minister. But as a doctor, he saw the wounding and the tragedy and the injury and the bloodshed. And he was summoned at the right time or the right moment. And today it is a great honor to be able to have with me his son, his eldest son, Muhammad Tawfik Tun Dr Ismail to join us today. And we're going to go back through history and listen to the times, which are very important today for all of us. So please join me to welcome, affectionately called Tawfik, coming to us live from Kuala Lumpur. And we want to hear his heart as I share my heart with him. Welcome, Tawfik.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. And yourself?
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, it's wonderful to see you today. I mean, we just met for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and I found it a really refreshing time to meet the son of one of our deputy prime ministers, who I personally believe would have taken this country on a totally different trajectory of truth and relevance to its people. So welcome once again to HEARTtalk, and I hope to be able to share with you some very important insights which are timely for us to hear at this time, in the journey of this country. So I want to go back with you. I mean, Tun Dr Ismail has been recorded and known and as a very disciplined man. He stood for what was straightforward, straight talking. He took no nonsense kind of person, and you carry his DNA. So take us back to what was it like? He was a home minister for all of us during that time in the 1970s. What was he like at home?
Well, thank you, Charles. First of all, he was a very straightforward and honest father. He told things as they were, no holds barred. He was very proud of the fact that he was able to get things done without too much help from the government. He was self-reliant in that respect, and as any doctor, he tried to rely on his skills and his knowledge of people to cure what would be a problem.
Now, when he went through, I mean, he came in the 1970s. I remember after the May 1969, episode, the tragedy. And where were you at that time?
I was a student in Australia when my father passed away. When in 1969, I was still in school. I was in my sixth form, I think, in 1969. But it was a time when we were all youthful and hopeful and optimistic. But May 13th changed all that.
I can imagine, because you're just about a year older to me, and I was in fifth form at that time in Johor Bahru and English College, Maktab Sultan Abu Bakar. And, I still remember, at that time, we just couldn't believe what was happening. But the reason why I'm bringing this into the forefront of our conversation today, Tawfik, is because many have forgotten. And if you saw that video clip in the beginning, I call those fault lines that happened. And it's very interesting that when Tun Dr Ismail in 1967, and I've got the dates down, on the 21st of May, he decided to take a break as a home minister because the home front was nice and quiet. And, elections had just finished. There was a resounding victory. And he looked and he said, well, everything is nice and stable in the country. I would probably take some time off to rest. But this is the thing about fault lines. We can't see what is happening below the surface. And even though everything was nice and quiet, but within 2 years, I talked about a compound comminuted fracture. Everything just burst out to the surface, and there we see bloodshed and tragedy. Now, this is something that's so important for us today, isn't it? We take for granted all these, tensions and fault lines that are going on without realizing that, God forbid, that if we are not alert today with a thinking population that is alert of what has happened before, we will never learn what injury can do. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think we have been fractured, as you rightly put it, in many places. But I would like to recall a conversation that I had with you when we first met. There's something in the Japanese culture called Kintsugi, where when you get a valuable object like a vase that dropped onto the floor and is shattered, you pick up the pieces and you try to put it together again using special glue. And the end result of that is something that is probably more beautiful than the original, because in the process of mending and putting together, you create something which is unique. It's the same thing as what was broken, but it's been repaired in a way that is satisfactory to you. So I think we need to apply the concept of Kintsugi to our nation to bring back the fractured pieces and make them better than what they were before.
It's a powerful thought and powerful concept. But when you talk about, putting pieces in together, if one does not recognize the causative factor that caused that to shatter in the first place, we can put all the glue that we want to, but it's the mindset and the thinking that is very it is an inner transformation that needs to take place first before we can get the people in to heal in the way that you and I would want them to be. Now, I'm going on that score because the crisis that I'm facing and I see today, I've been in Sabah for 35 years, Tawfik. And being in Sabah, you're quite detached from what's going on in the peninsula, in the West. And I still remember when I first came to Sabah, it was a bit of a culture shock to me because the moment I landed at the immigration, I was told, orang Sabah sana, orang bukan Sabah sini. And I was standing at the airport and I was telling myself, I thought this was Malaysia, But having been here for 35 years and having lived and served with an open heart to serve, you forget where you are because the people are so beautiful. And to smile is so natural. You don't have to go and create something, And this is something that is being missed. I believe very strongly. Your concept is a beautiful concept, but the inner healing of all these fractured pieces should start with the word truth. That when the people face the truth of what really happened and caused the fracture, the injury, then they will be, all geared up to bring about that healing that you talk about. So tell me, there's a crisis of identity today, Tawfik. I mean, you can have broken pieces but different jars, but we're all broken and coming together in the same jar. And until we have that identity fixed in our mind that we are Malaysians, that crisis of identity can take years for those pieces to come together. So what does this mean to be a Malaysian today? Your thoughts on that? Because that's a big question on everybody's mind. I served in the army. I did my service 2 years. I was sent to a district hospital at that time, 1980s. I know what it is to hold an M16 rifle when communist was alive in Bao, in Sarawak. I know what it is to have a Malaysian Chinese on my right and a Malaysian Indian on my left. And we were all doctors serving. So the concept of, you cannot change the concept within of our core values, the way we were brought up and programmed, that we are Malaysians. What's your thinking on that?
There are several issues that you brought up which come to mind. The first thing is how lucky you are to be in Sabah, where there are less prejudices among the people compared to what it is like in Peninsula. If you look at the fracture lines in that vase that we talk about, it's more pronounced in the peninsula than it is, say, in Sabah and Sarawak, because Sabahans seem to have this knack of being able to live with each other, no matter what the faith or the race it being of each individual, compared to what it is like in the peninsula, where we are very conscious of who's a Chinese, who's an Indian, who's a Malay, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a non-Muslim. I think these are differences which are very pronounced in this part of the world, which are not so pronounced in places like Sabah. And I think you're very lucky to be in a place like Sabah, where the differences are not as pronounced. Secondly, when you talk about being a member of the armed forces and serving, it brings back certain nostalgia for me, because I was educated in the Royal Military College.
Right.
And the Royal Military College in Kuala Lumpur, I think, is the best place for a Malaysian to be at that time, because you had sons of fishermen, sons of farmers, minister's son like me, Indians, Chinese, Sikhs, Kadazans, Dayaks, all of them living in a dorm and learning how to live with each other under military discipline, but nevertheless living under one roof. And I think we need more Royal Military Colleges in all parts of Malaysia to build up the nation, so that people get the sense of neighborliness and togetherness that seems to be something that a common discipline and a common goal can achieve. And I think this is something which is missing in this country, and I think we need to build on it.
Powerful, powerful, because this is the very core of being a human being, to respect another human being. I mean, these are basic values of life, you see. And I certainly learned that during my 2 years of service in the armed forces, like you rightly said. But you know, when I finished my 2 years of service as a doctor and went back to the surgical department in Johor Bahru, one thing I learned, and that was national pride. And it hurts me as a 70-year-old, plastic surgeon today when I look back. That pride is being desiccated. That pride today of those who have served is being humiliated by those who can't understand and see through the lens of what it is to be a Malaysian. You are a Malaysian Malay, correct?
Yes, yes.
So when that is now questioned, and when we talk about, and I'll come to it later, I want your thinking, because you're the son of a deputy prime minister who stood for what was right, what was truthful, and there's so much of deception, deceit, counterfeit, fake news that is coming out, Siromania. These are difficult times that we are facing, Tawfik. And if we don't get it right within a nation, how are we going to cope with all the geopolitical tensions that are going around us?
Absolutely. I think we need to communicate more. Social media has made it very much every man is his own broadcaster in the way that we are talking right now. And we create our own reality, and we create our own a universe, as it were. And how we build on that universe that we create and how we manage it, I think, is the challenge of the future. And I think we need to think long and hard at ourselves, at what we have created and how we plod along, and whether or not we are going the right direction together. This is, I think, the key.
Absolutely. And that's why, I talk about the 3 R's. And these 3 R's are quite different from the 3 R's we are not supposed to talk about. And I talk about, the reason why I started off with you was May 13, 1969, that there should be a National Day of Reconciliation. to go back to those fault lines that erupted, that reminding of an injury, a fracture that was compound, that there was blood and bone loss. And once everyone in the generation Z, I don't know why they call it Z, because I know it as Z, but if they grow up with that idea of gratitude, thankfulness, humility, that we live in such a beautiful country called Malaysia, I tell you, the voices of unreason will be shut down.
I think another trait which is very important is trust. I think we need to trust one another. We need to be able to trust that the other person understands us in as much as we expect to understand him. For example, if I was going to a Hindu house, I would not ask for beef, for example. I would be very sensitive and mindful of the sensitivities of that person. In the same way that if somebody came to offer me food or nourishment, he would not offer me pork because he knows that I'm a Muslim. So these are the kind of sensitivities and trust that enable us to talk to each other and be comfortable with each other.
Absolutely. And I can tell you one thing. I mean, my children are all doctors, and they're all in their 30s, and they move around with all their different races. They don't understand what are fault lines because those are all just below the surface. But if we don't watch them carefully, they can erupt into bigger tragedies that we just cannot imagine. And on that note, I want to drift you to, I mean, you started a movement which I think is a very much a people movement called Gerak Independent. Give me an idea of what started that? When did that start, and how did you get that in going?
Well, it was born out of experience more than anything else. I was a party man in the sense that I was a member of UMNO. And to be honest, when I entered politics, it was with a sense of idealism and a sense of purpose. But that sense of idealism and that sense of purpose was very short-lived because party discipline tended to whittle down whatever enthusiasm you have for the higher values of life. And also party discipline is something which I'm not used to because it means that you have to agree to things which sometimes doesn't make good common sense. And this is very important in politics, common sense. Because if you apply common sense to the things that you do in your daily life, you can live a much more fruitful and much more eventful life than if you just blindly follow what you're told to do so by the leader. And I think this is where I parted ways with the party. So I decided that I needed to be on my own. And this is where a group of us got together, 5 or 6 of us, and we decided that we needed to move away from party politics and represent ourselves as individuals, as Malaysians, with a sense of purpose which was much higher and much more logical than what any political party could provide.
Oh, this is, well, the nation needs to awake to this, a sense of awakening, because what is happening is that, even though, like, I've never heard of this party until now. And in the biblical literature, we have what are called the sons of Issachar, who could discern the times. And I think this is the right time where voices of reason, voices of relevance, and voices of resplendence come together, because the other voices are so loud you can't hear. But when you come down to the reasoning of why we are as people planted here by God in this beautiful land, that will stand the test of time. You agree with me?
Well, the time is right for a movement like Gerak Independence to emerge, but unfortunately, the Malaysian mindset is such that you tend to go for party politics because of the safety factor inside party politics, where you feel a sense of belonging. To me, a sense of belonging in a group situation can only go so far. After a while, the group might take you to the precipice and you all fall down together. But if you are thinking as an individual, you're able to stop the flow of people going over the cliff, and you can actually remind them that there is a cliff up ahead when they are blinded by rhetoric to say there is no cliff. So these are the kind of dangers that that party politics brings to the mind of the masses, but which an individual needs to bring to the consciousness of the many, so that people are aware of what's actually the danger ahead of them.
Oh, this is brilliant. And you know, it reminds me of this parable. I mean, you know, there's a story that there were three men in a boat, and one didn't quite agree with the other two. You imagine there are three parties. And so this guy decided to take all the three of them, go out to sea in this boat. And then this guy who didn't get along with the other two took out a drill and started drilling a hole with the idea of getting the other two drowned, not realizing that he would be drowned too at the same time. Which brings me to the key principle, which I feel as a doctor, when I talk to my team and when I go into surgery, and sometimes our surgeries can take 8-9 hours, is the word stakeholder. And that is, all of us are stakeholders in the vision and future of this nation, Malaysia. And that is what is now being questioned and confronted. That we think that there are individual groups who have the stake in this country who cannot and will not survive on their own. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's also very important that one of the cardinal rules of being a doctor's son myself, a doctor never lies to his patients.
And does no harm.
Yeah, and does no harm. And these are precepts which I think are very important in public life. If you're a doctor that is being asked to lead a nation, you cannot say one thing and do another thing when it comes to treatment of a problem. And I think this is where doctors might make better politicians than lawyers, because doctors are not trained to lie to patients, whereas lawyers, well, I'll leave it to your imagination.
Yeah, that imagination can go wild, but you know, I'm always reminded when I was sitting and you know, doing my research and listening, and I thought that, you know, Tun Dr Ismail as a doctor himself, how in God's own timing, at a time of national tragedy, when the fault lines surfaced, and there was he on the spot to understand how to bring about healing. I think he was one of those who brought the birth of the Rukun Negara, right?
Yes. He was very concerned that the country has a national ideology that it can look up to and that it can live up to. I think the Rukun Negara was not just him, but the meeting of many minds of similar purpose.
Yes, and I was reading the last call about, you know, some of the principles of the Rukun Negara. The end of it was morality. You know, when you talk about, and I want your thoughts on this, Tawfik, when you talk about the economic emancipation of a people, going right back to the 1940s, you know, when economy was on the minds of the British colonial people. And so when they thought of how to bring these nations out, and so we had all the Malays going to that particular area of paddy fields or fishermen, and then the Chinese coming in and the tin mines and all that. The most beautiful thing that comes out of an economic emancipation of a people are two-faced, and that is morality and ethics. But there's also a two-faced sized monster that can come out of that economic emancipation, and that is corruption and poverty. And I think this is something that we need to come together more than just racial fault lines, but how do we make people so successful that the word poverty becomes a strange word to all of us in this kind, especially at this time in this world, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think corruption is something which is it's not just a disease, but it's also a mindset, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
People tend to think that they can get away by paying their way through life, but nothing comes easy in life. You have to fight for it, and if you have to fight to keep yourself clean, then so be it. I mean, there is no compromise when it comes to living a good life, as you quite rightly pointed out several times when in our conversation that we've had. The virtues of being a virtuous person is far greater than the virtues of being an effective leader without principles.
Absolutely. And I think that, when you think about the future of this country, Tawfik, we talked about what it is to be a Malaysian. We talked about national pride, recovery. And I was talking about the 3 R's, and the first is a time of reconciliation. Do you think that this country has reconciled itself with the personal tragedies that happened in May 13, 1969?
Well, I think as a nation, we're still very much in our infancy. We're only 60 years old. There are nations that have been in existence for far longer. Look at China, for example, thousands
Right.
of years of civilization. But their problems are a billion times more than what we have. We have to look in terms of where we are in history, our ability to move as the nation compared to our age. We are still in our infancy. Like any baby, we do tend to make a mess of ourselves, and we do need to be changed. But we do have the advantage of having good nursemaids, good caregivers, good parents, and it's in our genes. And if we build on that, we cannot go wrong.
Now, these are wise words of wisdom, and the second R that I always talk about is the R of rehabilitation, that there's much being done to bring people out of poverty. Even in an urban area, you can have urban poverty. But with all the efforts that are being done, when you bring people out of poverty, how to prevent them from going back to poverty. And this is what I wanted your thoughts on when we talk about affirmative action. When you started off with the time of your father in Tun Dr Ismail's time, I remember we had this conversation about how he brought the whole ethics about golf.
About the NEP and
Yeah.
the game of golf, right? Well, in the game of golf, there is this etiquette that all golfers have to follow when you play the game. And the other point to note is that golf is very much an individual skill. You are the best person to make yourself a better player or the worst player. No one else can make you a better player except yourself.
Right.
Now, when you play the game of golf, everybody that goes in has different skills and different abilities. So they have a system called a handicap, where if you're a new player and you're completely an amateur, you're given a very high handicap. If you're the best player, you have a very low handicap. Now, a high handicap player, the game needs you to lower it to become a pro, so that if you improve with skill and you become more proficient in the game, your handicap is lower and you become as good as the guy whose handicap is minimal. Now, when my father, Tun Razak and Tunku, who were golfers, crafted the NEP, the idea was that because the Malays were so far behind in terms of commerce compared to the Chinese or the Indians, they needed to be given a handicap. So that handicap was the number of years that it would probably take them to achieve what the other races have already achieved. So they set a target of 30 years. Now,
Right.
During that time of 30 years, the Malays were supposed to reduce the handicap. So if you had 100% subsidy in the first 30 years, after 30 years, it should be almost zero. So this is where the NEP was crafted, so that people will work towards a goal where they will be less dependent on the government and more convinced and more skilled in what they were doing, so that they could compete with the best. And this is the idea behind the NEP, that the Malays were meant to be brought up to compete on a level playing field with the others. When the playing field is not level, the handicap comes in. So this is the idea of the NEP. But unfortunately, subsequent leaders after my dad, Tun Razak and Tunku, saw handicap in another sense, where they say a handicap is like you're crippled for life, where you are in need of crutches for life. And that kind of handicap, you cannot run away from. That kind of handicap, you're there for life. And I think this is the wrong way to look at the NEP.
Yeah, that's brilliantly put. And so what has really happened is that the handicap has been changed to handouts.
Yes.
And you can't do a long jump with you're still in crutches, because
Absolutely.
And this is why at the time of the 1960s and when it was all thought about, it was a brilliant way of thinking of how to equate and bring some form of equality among the economic level of strata in the different fault lines. But because of the way things have happened and the way they have turned out, it has worked towards the detriment of what is needed, and that is meritocracy. And when you talk about meritocracy and trying to get the cream talent that we need today, look, we've just gone through a pandemic crisis, Tawfik. And as a doctor, frontline, you see what has been happening. And now some of these doctors who have been trained, we spent about $1 million to train just one doctor, crossing over, going to other countries to have a better life and a better future. And if we don't come to our senses and keep them all together here, ready for the next wave of the next pandemic, we will be a nation totally sucked out. So this is why it's a worry, and it's people like you, the sons of Issachar, who discern the times right now. Gerak independent means how do we move forward independently? And this is timing. I mean, this is a brilliant timing for you and for your colleagues.
Well, Charles, one of the things that in life which we have to take into account are the unintended consequences of our actions. Sometimes we do things without a plan or without a goal, but if we don't do it, the worst things can happen. So there's no harm in trying. If it means that you have to take a risk in doing something because you feel it is right, then go ahead and do it. Don't hold back, because if you hold back, you might be doing more harm.
Right, right. And I mean, point taken. And again, words of wisdom. But again, when you talk about transformation, there's a gentleman called William Bridges. Have you heard of William Bridges? William Bridges wrote the book Transitions. And he talked about 3 different phases, making sense of life's changes. And he talked about the end, and then there's a neutral zone, and then there's a beginning. These are the 3 phases in transition. And since independence, 1957, this country has been in this neutral zone, waiting for a new beginning. And we do not know how long that period of a neutral zone is going to be. But if we don't get our basic understanding of these fault lines, then like any earthquake, you don't know when it's going to erupt. And this is something that is worrying for all of us at this time. And so coming back to your Gerak Independent, for personal transformation to take place, there must be an inner change. And you cannot change what you do not know. When it comes to politics in your Gerak Independent, don't you think that Parliament is the place where there's going to be transformation that will take place, to be in the Parliament?
Well, I think having been in Parliament for one term, I can tell you that it's the most boring place on earth. There is,
but when you go into the heart of the issues, like getting into a volcano, isn't it? It's boring until you get burnt out.
It is a forum which needs to be managed properly. There are people that go into Parliament blindly without knowing the Constitution, knowing what the standing orders are, and they make a mockery of the system.
Right.
For example, when it comes to the safeguards that are built into the nation, everybody must be conversant with the Constitution in order for them to know what are their rights and the limits to which they can pursue an objective. In the matter of, let's say, religion, it is the purview of the rulers and the sultans to determine a religion in their respective states. But the way the MPs talk about religion, it's almost as though it is their God-given right to determine how people think and behave in religion. And I think this is completely against the Constitution. And I think this is because people have been browbeaten by unscrupulous politicians into thinking that only the politicians have the solutions, which is not true. And I think a greater awareness of rights and a knowledge of the Constitution is very important in this country, because without it, people will stumble along like a blind man.
Absolutely. And this is the wisdom, that it comes with a growing up of a nation. And because we have learned through the tragedies of the past, we are fully aware. And I think the people of the young, we talk about the Muda, for example, which has, come up. and Gerak Independent, all these coming and coalescing together to bring a renewed awareness where there is shared preparedness. We need to prepare. When I talk about shared preparedness, allow me to just talk to you, and I want to know a little bit more about the Japanese Kintsugi towards the end of this. But there is a folklore, a Japanese folklore, where this young Japanese lad is going to school, Tawfik, and he's about 7, 8 years. He's skipping along the cliffs along in Japan, early hours of the morning at 5:30. And as he looks out into the ocean, far away, he sees a tsunami coming. And then he looks to the left into the valley, and his people are all sleeping and all that. So he starts to panic. He's only 8 years old. What to do? And you know what he did, Tawfik? He saw the tsunami and he said, what to do? He set fire to the rice fields. And when he did that, the people woke up. They saw their bread and butter, their livelihood being burnt. So they ran up to the cliff to put out the fire, and they saw the tsunami and went for cover. And I think this is a timely lesson where we are so engrossed with our own petty fields that we think that that is the only source of livelihood. When there is a tsunami that is coming, digital transformation, AI, all these things that are happening, geopolitical tensions going on in Japan, China, USA, that we are so embroiled in our small little mindset that we forget the bigger threats that are happening. And I think your point of bringing in this Japanese, so talk to us a little bit more as we come to the end about this Kintsugi. Is that right? Is that how you spell it? How do you spell it?
Kintsugi, Kintsugi, Kintsugi.
Well, it's brilliant. Tell us something about that, because this is probably what the Japanese little boy saw.
Yeah. Apart from the what little boy saw and how he managed to alert the townspeople, you brought up a very interesting point, which I mentioned earlier on about the unintended consequences of politics. When you mentioned Muda and the youth, who would have thought that giving the 18-year-old the vote would lead to what they call the green wave in the peninsula? Because suddenly you bring in all these new voters who are totally unaware of the tsunami ahead of them, as you were describing, and they vote in a completely wrong direction or in a different way that you expect, as a result of that, you get this so-called green wave coming up, and I think this is one of those unintended consequences of politics, which, if you don't think through properly, you get something which you never counted on. And I think this is where people like Muda and people who are crying out for change and reform should really think properly about the consequences of their action. So Kintsugi, for example, if you break something that's valuable and you try to put it together again, you have to be aware of the fact that when you put it back together again, it could be better looking than when you first dropped it, because the fracture lines and the way it is crafted after it is complete does tend to make the aesthetics of an object different and more meaningful, because you fixed it and it's your creation, as it were, because you have created something new out of something that's broken. Beautiful. This is what Kintsugi means.
Beautiful. And it can be translated from village to village, from kampong ethics to kampong ethics. I mean, a cross-pollination of ideas and thinking of the whole concept. I mean, you're talking about plastic and cosmetic surgery,
Yes, indeed.
Because plastic comes from the Greek word plastikos, which means to mold. And cosmetic comes from the Greek word kosmetikos, which means to adore. So you mold something and then you step back and then you adore what you have molded. And I think
I knew you'd like it.
I mean, I'm already loving it, because this is the concept. That's why I talked about the voice of reason. I talked about the voice of relevance. There's no such thing as anything irrelevant in the growth of a child, in the growth of a nation. If something has happened in the young childhood, a tragedy, a trauma, it stays with that child. So nothing is irrelevant in the growth of this nation. And the last one is resplendent, which is your Kintsugi, which is dazzling. This state of Sabah is dazzling. You go to the mountaintop, you go to the islands, you look at the food. I mean, Tawfik, this is sad to see the way the beautiful concept of Malaysia can be totally shattered by the wrong people with a small mindset that looks down through a lens of a microscope instead of seeing the telescopic vision of where this nation can grow and become.
Well, don't forget, we're only 60 years old, and by many standards, that is just an infancy. We are still crawling along. We have not yet got onto our knees. We have not been able to get onto our two legs to walk on our own. We still need to be held by the hand. We still need to be changed once in a while. So let's be patient with each other.
Absolutely. And well, this is the neutral zone that William Bridges talked about, but we don't want the neutral zone to go too long and see further tragedies. We want to see growth. We want to see prosperity, and we want to see integrity. And that's a lot depends upon our leaders. So in closing, Tom Brokaw, an American journalist, he wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. And it was a tribute to his father, the men and women during the Great Depression days, and how those men and women became leaders in government and business and education. And, when we look back and we think of Tunku Abdul Rahman, think of Tun Dr Ismail, you think of Tun Tan Siew Sin, Tun Sambatan, Tun, all those people that I remember would be on the black and white television those days, and the way they went through those fault line tragedies and put this country going on a course. I'm sure that your closing words would be that we hope that we have leaders today that are not taking us backwards, but leading us forward to a better Malaysia, a newer Malaysia. And which reminds me of the sculptor, the Italian sculptor Michelangelo, Tawfik. It is said that every time he sees a marble of stone, he would see an angel in it. And he would chip and chip and chip away until that angel was free. In 1957, Tunku Abdul Rahman saw that angel of hope and brought independence. 1963, that same angel was given new wings to fly higher as Malaysia. Now, hope is a currency that I always say is of the future used in the present. So you and I can hope as parents that the new generation coming up will see beyond all the smirk and the mud and the murk that is going on today, and see the jewel in the crown, that we are so fortunate and blessed that we are not in a nation of war, but we are in a nation that we can grow. So your closing words, and I want to just end with these words from the president-elect of Singapore, Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who just was elected. He said these words, and allow me to say this: race is never absent in politics, in anywhere in the world, but it is not the only factor. Each country is changing and evolving through a process of evolution. And now, having a non-majority ethnic president-elect, we should be able to discern the times that are coming forward. And so with that, your closing words to all of us, you're a man of wisdom. I call you one of the sons of Issachar, who discern the times. I hope that, look at Thailand. Thailand has a party called Moving Forward Party. No particular race, no particular fault line, just the concept of moving forward. So what are your thoughts on Gerak independent and all this that is happening today? What is it to be a Malaysian? Give us it, Tawfik.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you today. I would like to think that if we are to look ahead and we are to see beyond the horizon, it is because we are standing on the shoulders of giants before us. And I think we need to build on the strengths that they have provided us. And I think we need to carry on the baton of the race that they have passed on to us.
Beautifully said, beautifully spoken from the heart. And once again, from all of us on HEARTtalk, we want to wish you well. We want to wish you and your colleagues in Gerak Independent, moving with independent flag of success for this country. Success is not what you become; it's really what you achieve at the end. And on that note, I want to say thank you very much for joining us on HEARTtalk. And don't forget, from all of us, we want to wish you happy birthday on the 23rd of September. And
thank you.
So I've done a full research on you, and I'm not going to let you go because I'm sure there are more greater things to happen with Tawfik Ismail at the helm. So from once again, our love to you and best wishes, and we hope that we'll be able to see a truly better Malaysia as we continue to move forward. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. Thank you.
Pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on HEARTtalk. As you have heard, this is the eldest son of Tun Dr Ismail Abdul Rahman, a man who today would have taken this country on a different trajectory of peace and being honest to the people in this country. And we hope that this has been an inspiring talk, heart to heart, that we are on the course for a better Malaysia and a better future, because the currency of hope is still alive in all of us. So from once again, thank you for joining us on HEARTtalk. We'll talk again.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Charles Lee. Before this episode starts, I have a small favor to ask from you. Many visit and watch the videos and they find it very informative. They get excited. Some of them write to me on my email, but they don't subscribe. So would you do me a small favor? Would you just press that subscribe button? It'll be so good for all of us. Certainly it helps the channel grow. It adds a little bit of vitality to the channel. At the same time, the numbers get bigger, and my heart gets bigger too. So just to know that you're with me, you enjoy the company, and I enjoy your company, you won't believe it. So please subscribe, press that button. I want to hear those bells jingle, and most of all, stay tuned. And I love your company. We'll talk again.